Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. This is Dr. Andrew Rimby, and I get to finally talk about fashion, and it's a love of mine. So I am so excited to be joined here with an amazing guest. I've been watching so many of her YouTube clips. Sowmya Krishnamurthy, whose new book is called Fashion Killa: How Hip Hop Revolutionized High Fashion. So Somya's work has been in XXL, Rolling Stone, Vibe, Essence, Complex, Billboard, Playboy, The Village Voice, and Time. She is an on-air expert. She's appeared on NPR, CNN, MSNBC, BBC, MTV, SiriusXM, and Fashion Killa comes from Somya's expertise in music, fashion, pop culture. She was born in India, raised in Michigan, graduated from U of Michigan, Stephen M. Ross School of Business, and this is your first book. So congratulations, and I'm so excited to just dive right in with you, Sowmya.
Thank you. Let's go. And you look very fashionable today. For people who can't see, he's got like a little tropical shirt on. Like I went more cardigan, fall, back to school. It's a little bit chillier where I am, but Dr. Andrew, he looks like he's about to go on vacation.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm still in my summer Fire Island vibes. So I don't want it to go. I'm on Long Island. We have some nice weather right now, so I'm just enjoying. So I just have to ask you first, Sowmya. You wear so many hats, from being a freelance pop culture expert. I've seen your videos on Sway Show. You also are a freelance writer. How do you find it navigating all of these different faces that you wear?
It's something that I've always loved, just kind of this idea of being a multi-hyphenate. I mean, that's sort of the fancy word, but in reality, I'm just someone who gets kind of bored really easily. So this idea of being able to do a lot of different things, obviously with the centerpiece being in music, in hip hop and pop culture, I think it makes it fun. I think it makes it really interesting. And where we are in the media now, you really have to be somebody who wears a lot of hats, right? You can't just be the person with the byline. You need a podcast. You need to do on-air things. Need to bake a pie in an hour. Like you got to do all of these different things, and that's just really the name of the game. But I think if you have that passion and you are somebody who just likes to learn and a steep learning curve kind of interests you instead of scares you, I think it keeps it interesting. I think I've been in this industry over 15 years, like, which I think makes me officially an OG, or at least like a medium G on way to OG. And the reason is it's still fun. Like every day there's kind of something new. I can use different skill sets, whether it be in writing or my business school background and things like advertising and social media and marketing, all of those things. And it just kind of keeps things constantly fresh and interesting. And I like the idea of having a bunch of balls in the air at the same time.
Well, I was feeling so nostalgic watching you analyze Lemonade by Beyonce, or just these like pop culture moments that I remembered, like when Formation came out, and I even like used it in my college classroom to analyze what she was doing with that art form and protesting. So, do you look back at those moments and are you surprised about some specific pop culture just highlights and think, oh, wait, yeah, I was part of that conversation?
It's amazing. So, I mean, growing up, I was a kid who loved hip hop, and I would watch so many hours of like MTV and TRL and reading things like Vibe magazine and just having almost this adoration of people who got to live through like Biggie and Tupac, seeing Jay-Z's first concert. But when you're in the industry, you get to have your moments. I mean, some of my earliest interviews, now looking back, were Drake, Baby J. Cole, Kendrick Lamar, Travis Scott. Like I saw Travis Scott opening up for Iggy Azalea. So I just want you to like let that sit in for a minute. Like where were we compared to, the rooms he's doing now. And I think it's really cool is to be able to be a part of these moments, and hopefully for the fans and people at home, helping sort of distill it, analyze it in a way that's meaningful. And, really with this book, Fashion Killa, it was this idea of hip hop stories being told in these really important and essential ways. Oftentimes, as a culture, as an art form, when it comes to the literary world or sort of the larger culture, it still is getting its respect, right? We start to see these moments as hip hop turns 50 this year, but 50 is still kind of a baby compared to rock and roll and pop and country. So to be able to be at this place in my career where I came in as a fan. I have all these experiences working with now household name artists, but to be able to now tell these stories in a way that really live forever, right? It's in a book, it's forever. It's really a blessing, and I'm really appreciative.
Well, did you have a chance to see the Fashion Institute of Technology's amazing hip hop exhibit? It was
Absolutely.
incredible. Oh my gosh, I saw it in April. It was stunning what they did, I thought.
Yeah, it was great. And I think again, just to see the clothing up front and sort of what they look like on the mannequin, I think is amazing. And with Hip Hop 50, there have been a lot of these different sort of pop-ups and exhibits. And in many ways, it's been like this journey, kind of this nostalgic journey, but also a great history lesson. I mean, I wasn't around when those things were actually being worn on people. So it's this idea of sort of history and the fact that it's like history in the making, right? So who knows, like maybe what Cardi B is wearing now at the Met Gala one day will be in a museum exhibit. And that's pretty exciting to feel like you're a part of this like living, breathing history.
And just that term hip hop, I think what you do so brilliantly in your book, Fashion Killa, is just breaking down literally the intersection of what hip hop even means. Like, I'm even thinking of that FIT exhibit. There were pieces with Nicki Minaj, and I always think of Nicki as a rapper. But like even Beyonce has been a hip hop artist. She did that collaboration with the Chicks and they thought she was country. So I feel the hip hop industry is always in flux. Like it's this very fluid genre, like more so than say country is. Like there's a back and forth. How do you come to understand even just where this term hip hop derives?
Yeah, I think in the book, especially in the beginning, I do make it a point to sort of break down going back to the history. And we start in 1973, which a lot of people sort of agree is like the origins of hip hop. But of course, I always put in that footnote for like the true heads out there like, no, culture doesn't start on one day, one summer day in New York. Of course, it's kind of a continuum. But we all kind of agree on August 11th, 1973. And the elements of the culture included the b-boy, the DJ, emceeing, graffiti. Those were sort of like the cores that then expanded, and based upon who you ask, I think of a great KRS-One quote. It's like knowledge and fashion and all these things become part of this all-encompassing culture. Where we are now in the music business, it's tricky because the idea of genres is so blurred, right? It's before a lot of it was kind of these arbitrary labels given to genres based upon things like radio. So if an artist happened to be a Black artist, okay, you go to quote urban radio, whatever that means. If you're a white artist, now, okay, we're going to push you to pop or rock, regardless of what maybe your influences are or how you want to define yourself. Now, in this era of streaming, where people pretty much are taking genres and creating these multi-genre playlists, just this idea of these old school kind of nomenclature starts to feel really old school. So it's hard. It's a balance because on one hand, you definitely don't want hip hop to get so diluted that just everything is hip hop. But I also feel that with genres in general now, like if I put a cowboy hat on, am I country? You know what I'm saying? Like what are really those important pillars that we want to keep moving forward, but what are some of those old school barriers that really are kind of outdated? So as an industry, a lot of people are figuring that out right now.
Well, and as a queer scholar, I feel that hip hop, again, it's kind of the word queer, where it's an umbrella term, but you also don't want to, like you borrowing your word, Sowmya, you don't want to dilute it. Like you don't want to take away the essence of, say, for queerness, sexuality. Like
Yeah.
hip hop still has its roots. And I mean, to bring up queerness and hip hop, you look into racism, classism, homophobia. And I feel when I think of hip hop and sexuality, I think now of the iconic Little Nas X and like where hip hop has now gone in terms of even the clothing and the fashion and the way Little Nas X, his body is displayed in provocative ways, but he's proving this artistic point. So, what was it like when you were looking at, say, the ills of hip hop battling societal ills?
Yeah, I think we have to remember hip hop started very much as young Black men speaking to other young Black men about their experiences. And that's still very much, it's rooted in the Black American experience. And that can't be forgotten. And it must always sort of be understood. I think over time, different artists just started to feel like either they weren't being spoken to, a huge sort of through line that's constantly plagued hip hop has been things like misogyny, um, hypersexuality, hyperaggression. Even for women, it's sometimes this idea of can you be a feminist and love hip hop? And those are conversations that are often had. I think that can be very much extended to the queer audience. Like, can you love hip hop when, especially in the earlier days, there would be, homophobic slurs being used? They weren't oftentimes used, I think, with that intent, but that was just as a culture what was colloquial, right? Like a way to counter hyper masculinity was this notion, well, that has to be somebody who perhaps doesn't exude quote unquote masculine traits. Now looking back, again, it's all very antiquated, and even these idea of gender definitions, it's all very gray, it's very fluid. One can't be put into a box. And I think when we look at fashion, it was really important for me to highlight, not just sort of the men in hip hop who have taken on much more, I would say, gender fluid fashions. So somebody like a Young Thug wearing that, beautiful Italian gown on the cover of his Jeffrey mixtape, Kid Cudi showing up in a wedding dress to the CFDA, Little Nas X, really, like you said so eloquently, utilizing not just the clothing, but even just the skin and his body, and very much wearing that in a way to make a statement. And I think it's great. I think at the end of the day, hip hop, like so many other youth cultures, it's really about going against the establishment. So it's this idea that what was considered rebellious in 73 cannot be considered rebellious 50 years later. And I make the point in the book with the fans now, especially Gen Z, they don't aspire to have these old school rigid values. So of course those artists shouldn't either. And if it makes people uncomfortable in the industry or their parents, good, that's the point. Like, this is how you sort of push those buttons and make that parents just don't understand music. So when people sort of wag their finger like, no, this is not true hip hop, or it's somehow taking away from the forefathers, I don't believe that, because if anything, I would prefer people living their truth, whatever that is, in a way that's healthy and safe than kind of keeping things in the dark, where that doesn't help anybody, the music or the culture.
Well, and even thinking about Dennis Rodman, I mean, Dennis Rodman being in drag, and I don't want to say there was never backlash because I'm sure there is backlash to these like drag type accessories or how Dennis Rodman presents himself, but it kind of is interesting how it's acceptable as a professional basketball player. Like, oh, that's just Dennis. Or, understanding that there's this freedom in fashion. And I am wondering, like, I am a white man and, Sowmya, you were born in India. Like, what is it like for you in terms of looking at the Black empowerment aspect of hip hop? Like you brought up, hip hop really is deriving and coming from Black men, and like it comes out of the community. So, like, how does that feel in terms of even being an ally or observing what's going on with the industry and fashion?
Yeah, I think it's important anytime that you're within a culture is just to know the origins, to respect that, and also the people behind it. So their stories, their struggles, and like you said, to be an ally, I think is important. Even within the hip hop industry, there are people who kind of come in, they want that one rapper for a song, and then you never hear from them. Or if there's issues that are relevant to the community, they say nothing because it's like, well, it's not my problem. And I think that's, to me, very kind of inauthentic. But to make sort of an investment and a contribution in the long term, you really has to have that reverence and respect. I think what's always been great about hip hop and why it's now global is there has been this feeling of acceptance where even, we go back and look at someone like an Eminem, which now, I mean, him being the highest selling rapper makes a lot of sense, but it could have been very easy to like dismiss him like, well, he's a white boy from 8 Mile, like he has no authority to be an artist. But there was a difference between, let's say, Eminem versus Vanilla Ice, right? And obviously Vanilla Ice had some big records too, but that felt more so like parody or almost using the culture and almost this kind of like culture vulture way, right? So I think that's really important in any sphere, even something like fashion, where it's important for people to, know the history, know the people, and also when you do have a platform to advocate. I think that's really important. Some people might disagree. They kind of view it as like a business. You do your job, you go home. But I personally feel, as somebody who, I'm one of the few women in my position, probably one of, if not the only person who's kind of, first generation from another country, and also grew up in a small town. Like I didn't grow up in New York or LA or Atlanta, like one of these big hubs. So being able to have that very cosmopolitan perspective, I think is helpful because you're able to be very sort of empathetic and sensitive to all kinds of people. And I do think even with this book, I was really, really intentional that we have to be inclusive, because the few times hip hop and fashion are talked about, it's always through the lens of New York. It usually ends by like 2000, because after that they get tired and are like, nah, skinny jeans, that doesn't count, and this is boring, and streetwear. Women are usually very much left out, and there might be a few kind of bold-faced names like a little Kim, but I want to make sure, no, let's make sure we shout out like a Missy Elliott, who was able to really be a leader in body positivity before we had that term, right? And this idea that you can be the star of the video. We're not replacing her with the skinny girl or the model. Like, no, that's who she is. Similarly, looking at a global perspective, like we have to talk about what was going on in like London street style, of course, Japanese street style. How do we get to Bape and BBC and all of those things without looking into like Nigo and his story? So I think that was really important, that if we're going to do a comprehensive 50-year retrospective, let's make sure that those blind spots that oftentimes do plague hip hop, being very New York centric through like a male lens, sometimes an older lens, like being super cognizant of trying to underscore a lot of those unsung contributions as well.
And what you really bring to bear is just how many layers of identity there is with hip hop. And like that you are really opening the door for, say, not just, a Missy Elliott. Like there are many women who are part of the hip hop movement. And, there are those who are queer, or there are those who don't fit like this image of, say, a straight male hip hop performer. So I think that's a credit to you just drawing so much from the archive and your own experience with interviews. So I was curious, for your interview process of Fashion Killa, did you have very different conversations when you were talking to those from the hip hop industry compared to those from the fashion industry? Just because of gatekeeping. Like, I guess when I think of fashion industry, I do still think of that like Condé Nast model, or like there's a certain wall and there's a language you need to learn, where the hip hop industry seems more accessible because of its roots. And maybe that's a misreading on my part.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that your point about fashion is very true. It is this idea of, whether it be from the fashion industry, even fashion media, I think in many ways there have still been gatekeeping, barriers to entry. And we have to think about even luxury fashion. The very notion means it's something I can have and you can't have, right? It's a luxury. It's not a right that everyone gets to have. And inherently, there has to be some idea of the haves versus the have nots. I think in the interviews, it was interesting, just people's sort of perspectives and where they were rooted in. So obviously, someone who grew up in hip hop and faced a lot of these challenges, whether it was not being able to pull clothes for a certain artist or reaching out to the publicists at these big fashion houses and being totally ignored, versus somebody in fashion who, for many of them, their idea of hip hop was, much more recent. So they're thinking late 90s, early 2000s, right? I think now things have changed a little bit with someone like Dapper Dan's resurgence, but remember, it was the fashion industry who tried to like get him out of business, and it was Twitter who brought him back, right, decades later. So now the industry has to learn some of those archives and that history. But for a long time, I think you talk to a fashion person and they would say hip hop fashion really, certain names like Sean Puffy Combs, maybe Little Kim to a certain extent, maybe Kimora Lee Simmons, maybe. But at that time, a lot of those lines, baby fat, Rockaware, things like that, were called like, quote, urban fashion. So a person in the industry might have thought, well, I didn't cover that. Like, I only cover high fashion. And really, one of the through lines of the book is like this definition of luxury fashion is constantly changing, because now you ask a kid, they're talking about like Supreme. That might be their version of a luxury fashion line, versus their parents' version of a luxury fashion line. And it's becoming much more global. We're underscoring like niche designers, the new exciting designer. Like, those are the things that are really making those waves. So I think when it came to the interviews, it was just making sure that being able to bridge those conversations. And very few people had worked in both industries. I think maybe only a handful. So for the most part, you could sort of see where people's like perspective was steeped from.
Mm. Was there a specific interview? Like I know you interviewed Tommy Hilfiger, right? And how was it talking to someone who actually created a brand? Or it wasn't just Tommy Hilfiger, but you've interviewed a few who like they actually are the creator, like this is their vision. Is that an intimidating process?
No, not really. I interviewed a lot of people. So I think, yeah, as time goes on, I could interview Joe Biden right now and it wouldn't be intimidating. I think what's interesting with the designer, so Tommy Hilfiger, Carl Kanai, April Walker, Dame Dash for Rockaware. There were a few names that were people, and then also some people behind the scenes. So like Dao Yi, he was at Sean John and then started public school, very successful line. So Loic, who works with Pharrell, and they launched BBC together. So some of them, again, are kind of these eponymous names you might know, and then others are behind the scenes people who are like doing the work as well. I think it's just an interesting perspective. You really get this balance between art and creativity and commerce, because at the end of the day, you got to sell some clothes, right? So that was always interesting, talking to those people, just getting that perspective of the industry. Tommy, what was really interesting, I spoke to him and Andy Hilfiger, his brother. What I wanted to show was just the journey of that line. And for Tommy, his background is just a kid who loved music. And there's this great quote I included, something like, I couldn't play an instrument, so I might as well have like dressed like the artist. And again, I'm paraphrasing, but it's something to that effect. And both of them really underscored how hip hop was so seminal in becoming a household name. When Snoop wore that famous rugby on the stage at SNL, like that was the watershed moment for that line. And of course, there were others. We have the great anecdote with Aaliyah, and also there's an awesome photo of her in the book too. You'll see in the final copy that shows how this line really was revolutionary and streetwear and pulling like kind of these more tomboy looks for women and things like that. And another thing I was really important was talking about that infamous rumor, right, that almost canceled Tommy Hilfiger. I remember so distinctly. I was in like middle school, and my friend, who's a big Tommy Hilfiger head, like pulls me aside and says in a whisper, "Oh my God, Tommy Hilfiger's racist. I can't wear these clothes anymore." No one knew where the rumor started, but it circulated like he had somehow gone on Oprah. He had made these very disparaging comments. Oprah kicked him off the show. And the word on the street was like, we don't fuck with him anymore. And what's so interesting is that never happened.
Hi, this is Dr. Andrew Rimby, the host and director of the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. I hope you're enjoying what you're watching on the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. So to watch the rest of the episode, head to our Patreon. It is patreon.com/Ivory Tower Boiler Room. That's Ivory Tower Boiler Room. And you can watch the rest of the episode on our $5 a month membership called ITBR Student, or join the ITBR Professor membership. It's only $10 a month. You get access to all of our videos. You get access to both of our book clubs, the Ivory Tower Boiler Room and the True Crime and Academia book club. Plus, you unlock all of our other episodes. So at the ITBR Student, you only get access to our weekly interviews and the True Crime and Academia episodes. For $10 a month, you get access to our ITBR rewatches, our Teaches series, and True Crime and Academia rewatches and Teaches series, plus the book clubs. Okay, can't wait to see you all on Patreon. And just a reminder, I also offer consultation services. It is $30 for your initial consultation. You get a 1 hour private Zoom with me, and I will help you whether you want to create your own podcast and or media brand, you want to navigate academia as an undergrad or grad student, you need help with technology as it relates to teaching or media. Do you want to expand your social media presence as an artist, writer, podcaster, or academic, or even crafting your public humanities identity? I will help you with my consultation services. You can also find that on Patreon as well. Okay. Thank you all for watching and for supporting the Ivory Tower Boiler Room. Bye.